In this episode, we'll look deeper into the complexity of adapting to new cultures, redefining identity, and finding the definitive of truth, the pathway of communication with others in the most uncommon spaces. I copied this from your Amazon page, so I think it might sound very, very familiar to you. And helping us with this is an award-winning best-selling poet and a community builder. Welcome to the show, Renzo. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Toby. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction.
Thank you so much. When I was preparing for this conversation, I was like, how can I introduce this episode? And then, I was, preparing and going to your Amazon page and going through different things I could find about you. And I found, this statement on your Amazon page and also the amazing reviews you've gotten on your book. Still, I hope we will be able to speak about the collection of poetry in this episode too. I found different statements which we'll talk about, and I found this one. I was like, yes, this is something I would like to talk about with you. I would like to really go deep into the complexity of adapting to new cultures and
Sure.
redefining identity and all of that. And that's why I'm so happy we're having this Soulful conversation. And when I first saw complexity of adapting to new cultures, I was like, okay, what does that mean? Then I got to find out that you moved from Peru to Miami. I'm like,
I
oh
did.
yeah, makes sense. So let us start with that. Can you share how that journey was like for you, moving from Peru to Miami to the US, and how that whole change was like for you?
Of course. Well, first of all, again, thank you so much for having me here. I've heard the podcast. Like I've told you before, I really value how you create space for people to share, and thank you for letting me share, right?
Thank you.
My family immigrated from Peru when I was about 5 years old. The reason for that is there's a terrorist organization in Peru called Shining Path, still around in remnants. And my mother was the secretary to the Minister of Health, and there was a union negotiation with members of Shining Path who were armed, and they had sequestered people there because they were armed, and they weren't letting go until they achieved whatever goals they had for the negotiation. And my mom, I guess, played on their misogyny and said, "Hey, do you guys want coffee?" And they're like, "Yeah, woman, go get coffee."
Yeah.
And she came back with the police. And they arrested the people who were armed. So they apparently marked my mom for death. Not apparently, they marked my mom for death. So one of our nannies was a terrorist. They found her before she did anything. One of the nurses, when my sister was born, was a terrorist. They found her also when my mom was giving birth to my sister before she did anything. And there was a third one that I can never remember. And my mom said, well, to hell with this. And we decided to move to the United States, where my godfather was already here. He ended up being like vice president of an import-export company in Miami. And he was kind enough to sponsor my student visa. So I was very lucky that I had a student visa like for the majority of my stay here until I was able to get my citizenship. But the process took we had political asylum, and we obtained political asylum like right before I graduated high school. So all of my scholarships that I had earned through high school were in jeopardy, because if you're not a citizen or you're not a resident, you don't have a status, you don't get to take those scholarships and move on towards that. And there was no way we could afford school. So that's how we got here, really.
Wow. And I was like for you, I'm leaving everything behind in Peru. I mean, first of all, it's a very big change, or a very, difficult situation to be marked for death, basically, I would say. Having to overcome that, leaving everything behind in Peru and moving to Miami. How was that journey like for you?
So it's interesting, right? Because I have the benefit of being a child at that time, and I have some distance, right? But it definitely informed my parents' worldview and the actions that they took. So, for example, my dad abandoned he was a major in the Army. He was a pilot, fighter pilot, helicopters. And he abandoned his military career to come here with us. And it got resolved years later, but for a long time, he was dishonorably discharged. When we moved here, the way that their lives were based on fear, right? Like fear was a very integral part. And while we were young enough to be separated from it, it informed the way that we were raised. It informed the way that we developed. So I'll give you an example. When we were in Peru, I guess we were upper middle class. or lower upper class. There was not much money in Peru. That's the reason that groups like Shining Path existed, the lack of distribution of wealth and other social problems that we can talk about. But when we got here, we went from having something to basically having very little to, I don't want to say nothing because my parents worked very hard to make sure it wasn't nothing, but it was very little. So I remember being like 7 years old and 7, 8 years old, old enough that I could understand, but not get the context of it. And my parents saying, go ahead and eat. We already ate, knowing that they were lying. For me and my sister, go have dinner when they didn't eat anything because there wasn't enough money for food for all of us. So it informed the way that I was raised. So if you asked little Renzo, what do you want to be? I want to have money, right? I want to have money because money means the lights don't get turned off. It means safety. But Toby, you know there's never enough safety.
Yeah.
So there'll never be enough money. So having that as a goal really skewed my perception of joy for a long time, right? So the way that it informed that, being marked for death, having to leave a country, maybe we wouldn't have left if that wasn't the case, or maybe we would have anyway because of the economic situation in South America. And my godfather was already here. I mean, it's hard to play those what ifs, but it definitely informed the way that we were raised. There was definitely some fear, definitely a lack, and definitely anxiety about safety.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, I mean, I admire your strength to go through all that phase, and I mean, respect to your parents for really pulling through that difficult phase of their life. I can imagine. But for you, Renzo, I mean, having experienced that as a kid, and then being in, thrown, I won't say thrown, but being set into the system, into the US system, I think you have to adapt to new culture, new geography, and also gradually let go of that mindset of, oh, I want to make money so I could get security, so I could, have lights, or I could have enough to eat. How was that whole transition journey for you? Like, from being a young Renzo with that, I must get all of this done and put in place so I can have my life secured, to who you are today.
Sure. So I actually went to UF, the University of Florida. I went there for aerospace engineering, and I stopped 6 credits short of graduating and switched to poetry, much to the delight of my immigrant parents, right? Like it was, how are you going to eat? What are you going to do? You were going to be an engineer, which is a solid career. Poetry is this, but I had never rebelled, and poetry was very important to me. We didn't have, like I said, much in terms of financial security growing up, so there wasn't a lot of travel, a lot of that, but books were free, library was free. My parents had always inculcated learning and a thirst for knowledge in me and my sister, and my grandparents the same, the people that I talked to the same. So I discovered poetry very early on. And my cousin, growing up, he passed away recently, but we were the same age, and he was one of my best friends. We were in high school together, and he was in a rap group, and he was saying, like, why don't you do poetry? And I'm like, no, I can't write poetry. What is poetry? I love reading it. He's like, dude, you can write, try it. It's in the attempt. So I started, and then as an engineer, as somebody who was going for an engineering degree, I was always fascinated by how things work, taking them apart. But poetry helped me just appreciate that they worked at all, if that makes sense, right? And if you think about it historically, our diplomats, our ambassadors, our thought leaders were all artists. They were poets. And you think of, even when a fascist regime comes and takes over a country, the first people that they eliminate are the artists, the poets, the thinkers, right? And so I did that, but I'm 40 years old. So there was a summer program in Cambridge for grad school in the UK, and I applied and I got in with a portfolio of poems. I was super excited. I wanted to be like this long-haired hippie poet in Cambridge, right? It's just like writing poetry and all of that stuff. But it was after September 11th. It was 2006. And for anybody who's been in the United States around that time, they'll remember that it was a heightened situation. It was up to the discretion of the immigration official at the gate at the time if they let you back in. I knew two people who were deported. They weren't terrorists. So my parents had a conversation with me, and I didn't fight it. I didn't. It made sense. They were like, how about you just finish here, finish studying here. So I took a year to think about what I was going to do because it was a gut punch, right? I thought this is what I'm going to do with my life, and then I'm not. And I ended up doing mass communications because it had the foundational logic of engineering with the communication aspects of poetry, which is what I truly enjoy, because I think if there's any divinity in this world, it's between you and I communicating right now in the space between. That's where God or the universe exists, at least for me, right? So when I did that, I had to come back to Miami and help out with the family, just financially. And I was originally planning, after my mass communications master, to do international relations in the School of the Americas. I was applying to the School of the Americas in Virginia, but I had to come back. I was making good money, but not steady money, which is no money at all, right? If it's not constantly coming in. And I needed to figure out what to do with my life. So I thought about it. And for me, again, this is a disclaimer just for me, there are two industries in the United States that benefit from inefficiency: law and healthcare. The worse you are at it, the more money they throw at it, in my experience. So I took a job at a call center for a healthcare company. And within a week, I was doing projects for them. I became a project manager, then a consultant, then a senior manager for a PMO, and eventually an executive in healthcare. And I addressed the finance first. I ended up having no debt. And then I ended up having savings. And then I ended up making sure that I was financially secure, and then making sure that my family was financially secure. Until, guess what? I was not happy. I wasn't happy because there is never enough safety. And I have a really good friend. His name is Kurt. He actually wrote the English forward. I have an English and Spanish forward in the book. He went to grad school with me. He wrote the English forward for the book. And yeah, I remember that day because I got mad at him unjustly. It's not his fault. It was mine. He asked me what I was passionate about. I couldn't answer him because everything was in relation to that goal and to other people. I couldn't speak to what made me passionate. And he said, well, figure out what your passion is, because that'll lead you to your purpose. And a life of purpose is a life of joy. That's how Kurt talks. All right. That's exactly, I am quoting him verbatim. And took me a while, but I realized I was very happy solving complex issues. I love puzzles. I love brain teasers. I love putting my mind to complex issues and finding a solution, right? That was the engineering aspect, taking things apart, putting them back together. And I also truly enjoy, I don't know if it's narcissistic or not, but I hope that you are better off because we met. I firmly believe that you should leave somewhere better off than you found it. And I realized that even though healthcare, which I considered a failed system, it seemed like a Sisyphean task, right? Just rolling that boulder up the hill, and you will never really fix any of the issues with healthcare as long as the foundation stays the same. I found out that I can solve complex issues there every day, and I can coach my people there every day. And doing the same thing that made me unhappy made me very happy.
Oh, yeah.
Why do I mention this? In 2020, my dad passed away from pancreatic cancer. And I was having a very difficult time with it. I was moving too fast to grieve, right? I was just, the way that I deal with problems typically is like, what can I do about it? Is there a to-do list? Let me focus on the actionable things I can do, because I'm powerless against pancreatic cancer. I'm powerless against death. I'm powerless against the impotence to try to go up against these environmental things that we really haven't figured out what to do with or can do something about. And it was in a period of my life where I had lost a lot. My grandmother died as well in those 7 years. My cousin, who I mentioned, was run over by an SUV. My little cousin had a heart defect. My best friend's mom died from multiple tumors. My dog died. Friends had died. Coworkers had died. The relationship I thought was going to be marriage ended around the time my dad was sick. And I thought life had stopped giving me things and it started taking them away, which logically it's not true. You and I met today.
Yeah.
We had maybe emailed back and forth, but maybe after today, you and I become lifelong friends. That's a gift, right? Maybe. So logically, it's not true, but emotionally, that's where I was until I realized that I am made up of all the little pieces of everybody I ever loved. The way I comb my hair, my half smile, sushi, right? Like, did you try sushi the first time because you're like, hey, I want to eat this? Or did somebody you admire or love or care about say, hey, this is tasty, why don't you try it?
Hey.
Just as an example, right? Your favorite movie, your favorite book, your favorite piece of music. And if that's true, then they're still with me. And I needed to stand still, stop running, and allow myself to feel all that. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I got back into poetry, because poetry is a tool for me that I admire to express these feelings, these sentiments, to try to connect, to make sure that, you know, it's not literally all about them. Thematically, it is, right? It's not fully autobiographical, but if you read the book and like it, maybe you'll love the people I love a little bit. Maybe you'll realize that there's something you want to say. Maybe you want to create something in a world where we tear things down, and it's better to create. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I wanted to give you the journey of how I went from that to the book, to poetry, back to how I found my way back to poetry.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much for that answer. I really appreciate it. And I would like to say, I'm so sorry for the loss of your father. And I believe you're still processing the grief in the most healthy way. I hope and I believe. I mean,
Thank
because
you.
I know it's a long journey to, you know, I'm sure you loved and cherished your father. He had to go because of cancer. And yeah, even though sometimes one believe one has, you know, process the grief, it comes back in waves basically, and you'd have to work on that from time to time, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the illustration you made about, you know, of sushi, because that's exactly how I started eating sushi. Actually, the example you gave.
It's so good. It's so good, Toby.
Yeah, you're right into my mind, and yeah, I remember the day I tasted sushi for the first time. So because of someone I admire and see as a mother that said, "Oh, just try it," and I was like, I never wanted to eat this thing, but because I love you so much, I'm going to just try it.
And
Yeah.
now maybe it's part of you, right? So
Yeah.
it's they're with you always. They're
Yes.
always with you, and what they taught you in the experiences you share, as long as you are here, they're here.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
And it
I want
speaks to legacy, right? That speaks to, you know, some people think about maybe genetics, and I'm not discounting that, but if our great grandmother cooked like a specific brand of chicken soup that we're using to this day, then that person's still with us in a way. You know what I mean? There's like the way you
yes.
tie a tie, the recipes we pass on. It's this legacy that we pass on down to the next generation. And that also informed the book. I wanted to leave something for my nephews, if I ever have kids, for them to know our family a little bit.
Yes, I love that so much. That's very good. I mean, passing down the legacy, passing down the history, the story, yeah, the values that you want the next generation to have. That's very valid and very important. And one of that thing, what your friend said was like, also, it touches me. Like, you know, you finding your passion. And once you are able to find your passion, you'll find true happiness, true, you know, fulfillment also. And I'm happy that you found your passion again. You went back to poetry and you made something wonderful that is helping the world out today. That's wonderful. That's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask, you know, if a reader or a listener right now picks up still, what should he or she, you know, look forward from reading the book, the collection of poetry?
Oh, Toby, my greatest hope is that they'll be inspired to create something. I think so. One of the reasons that I love not just poetry, but art in general is because it teaches you an analytical relationship between yourself and an object. Think about a painting or a song. When you start dissecting it, right, you start looking past the surface and going deep into layers of meaning. So when you do that, you start seeing things from a different perspective, and that helps empathy grow. And in my opinion, empathy is the greatest natural resource we're lacking right now as a society. I know that every society faces like, this is the worst we've ever been, or this is the most divided we've ever been. If you look at historical documents, people have felt that way in every generation, right? But I
Yeah.
truly think the world is divided. And it's because, in my opinion, we lack empathy as a society. We are the things people say to each other online, or I don't think they would be able to say it if they're looking at someone eye to eye and say some of the destructive things that are said. Or think about just watching like a basketball game, like as a Heat fan, right? I know other people would be like, take Jalen Brown's knees out. Like, why would you want to have somebody hobbled at the knees? You know what I
Mm,
mean?
yeah.
It's not true. I don't think that that's our natural state. But I do think that we are a society that is focusing on entertainment right now. I found myself watching a film and then going to Wikipedia, reading the synopsis, and then while watching a film, doing other things on my phone, unable to read for more than 5 minutes when I love to read books. And I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? So I had to retrain myself to read for longer than 10 minutes at a time, which was easy to do if you keep at it.
Yeah.
And I think that if our exposure to art allows that, my thesis in undergrad, in grad school, when I was doing poetry, I wanted to prove a correlation between the decline of funding for the arts in the United States and the decline of protest culture around the time of Korea, right? The Korean War. And now we have, when people were questioning what we were doing, why are we going to war here? Why are we doing this? And now it's like this UFC, Super Bowl, Copa America, World Cup mentality of like us versus them. And I think art challenges that because it creates that analytical relationship. So, for example, I'm a product of my worldview. I've had my experiences. I have an idea, a thesis, right? Let's talk dialectical realism. You are a product of your experiences where you grew up. You have your own ideas that might clash, not necessarily, but maybe clash with mine. That's an antithesis, a separate and opposing idea. And if we are able to come together with empathy and resolve that, we create synthesis, a new idea, a new way of understanding. And I think art helps us with that because let's say you leave this conversation with your memory of it, and it's true for you. I leave this conversation with my memory of it, which will be true for me, and it might not be yours, and somewhere in the middle is what actually happened. But all of those truths are valid. And I think art allows for the complexities of that to exist so that we can come together and resolve things as a unit instead of as you're wrong, I'm right, and my identity being determined by my correctness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think art helps us to create like a safe space and helps us to, express ourselves in the most healthy way or in the most, how would I say it, in the most safe way, I would say also, yeah. Like helping us to, be vulnerable in some ways also. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why travel is so important. And look, I know that as somebody who's been on both sides of that coin, I know that I'm very lucky and very privileged to be able to travel now. And travel is a very big part of my life. But before, as I said, I could travel to the library and pick up books, right? But I think it's important to go to a different neighborhood. Like if you live in Miami where I live and you've never been to Little River, you've never been to Little Haiti, you've never been to Little Havana, go eat at a restaurant there, go talk to locals, go learn about the neighborhood, go see the different types of architecture, like just learn a little bit more about different places because that'll expand your imagination. I have no basis for this. This is my belief, but I think it's very difficult to imagine things you have no basis for. So would you imagine being able to fly if you had never seen a bird? I don't know, right? I don't know, maybe, but I think it's more difficult to do that, right? So the more you are exposed to different cultures, the more you can imagine, the more you can dream, the farther you can go, and the more you can create community with other people that have very similar likes to you. And maybe language is a barrier, but not to diverge, but I'll tell you a story. Yesterday, I was very fortunate. A good friend of mine, Scott Raven, he's a poet here in Miami too. He invited me. He's doing a summer program with underprivileged kids, teaching them poetry in schools for summer. And he invited me to join him because he was teaching. He wanted to teach Spanish poetry, and he doesn't speak Spanish as fluently as I do as a native speaker. And he said, hey, why don't you come and join me and we'll teach the kids like Spanish poetry and see what we can do, right? So I went there and we had this conversation. And at first the kids weren't paying attention. They were being rambunctious, right? They were like making jokes and laughing on their cell phones, etc. But I realized it was because they weren't really understanding us when we were speaking in English. So I started, tag teaming with Scott, talking to them in Spanish, asking them their name, asking them directly what they think about something. And the conversation organically turned to how difficult it is to be understood when you don't speak a language, and how people look down on you, how people might think you're not as smart as them, when language is a conduit for intelligence, humor, sarcasm, like anything, just like it's a conduit to show your true self, right? Language is a tool. And it eventually turned into, well, when my friends don't understand me, then we're upset and we get into a fight, and then how it creates conflict, and how instead of, you can either resolve conflict with violence, you get into a fight with some kid at school, or you end up being best friends playing Pokemon cards, like over there. And it was just a beautiful reminder of how important it is to speak different languages so you can get different viewpoints, and again, grow that empathy that allows you to connect with the other citizens of this world.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Art or even poetry helps us to have empathy, helps us to create connections, and in terms of creating connections, helps us to build a healthy community also. And also, when you talked about all I said is okay. Yeah, when you talk about traveling, also, when I was younger, I used to read a lot of books. You talked about you going back to wanting to read longer than 10 minutes. I'm also in the same shoes basically, because when I was younger, I used to enjoy reading a lot, like a lot of novels, and I used to assume back then, because I come from Nigeria. And in Nigeria back then, I read a lot of American novels, and then they expose you to different worlds. So to me, it was like traveling, like being in Florida and being in New York. And some writers are so detailed with their writings. They describe everything, and you have the picture in your head. I feel like I've traveled already, left my hometown, and I'm already in New York on the streets, seeing the lady with a red dress, walking around the street crowded with thousands of people, and all the buildings. I feel the screens showing different. I could have that picture in my head basically. I'm like, oh, I'm in New York right now.
But that's your imagination, right? But you had the book that allowed you to have, like, what would you have dreamed about if it wasn't for those books?
Exactly, nothing. Yeah.
But it took you somewhere else, in this desire, I think, look what you do now. You create spaces for people to communicate and dialogue, and with you and with your audience, and allowing a platform to give maybe others who wouldn't have that platform a voice to go out and show.
Exactly.
That is a beautiful thing, brother, right? Like, so, and I think, let me take the liberty in part from what you're telling me. This is a product of that type of upbringing, of learning different things, reading different authors, a desire to connect, which was different from the culture that you were born into. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, that exposure helped me also to, want to study abroad, move abroad, and also helped me to want to, have conversation with people, and even brought out that passion to want to have soulful conversations with people too. So that's why I totally agree with traveling. It exposes you to different things, expands your horizon, and art can help you travel a lot, and physically traveling too is very, very important and helps a lot.
Man, and like the food that you taste, and like the experiences that you see, and and the people that you meet, and like so Madrid, right? I love Madrid. I have a lot of good friends there, and one of the things that they have is El Paseo, the little trip. At the end of the day, people just go bar hopping at the end of the night, and they just walk around and doing that, because I think, at least in Europe compared to the United States, they have a different concept of leisure than we have here. So for example, I would be, well, I'm having an operation, but you can leave me a message if there's an issue with this project. And when I wake up from anesthesia at about 7:15, I'll look at my email and blah, blah, blah. Over there, they're like, yeah, I'm going to go read a book in the park because I want to feel the air on my face. It's a very different way of being. So I've done this paseo, and by the time I have at least 7 or 8 friends that would die for me and I for them after just traveling, like just going bar to bar and just talking and conversing and doing all of these things, right? But
Yeah.
to bring it back to your original question, what do I hope someone would from picking up still, what would they do? In the Spanish foreword that was written by a friend that I have in Madrid, Inigo, who was also friends with Kurt. It was part of our group in grad school. He said Renzo should be read in the lobby of a hotel. And to me, that's one of the greatest compliments I received, because it means that you take my book with you. You read, these poems are about traveling, about connecting, about moving. And what I would want for someone to do is, if they pick up this book, what I would like for them to take away is that, I created this book. What are they going to do? What will they create? What do they hope to achieve? Like I said, it's so easy to tear things down in this world. Criticism, right? Like, this movie sucks. That book sucks. Everybody sucks.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the book is not your taste, but I admire their use of syntax and grammar. Like, somebody put their heart and soul into something. They have to have produced something of value that they have to share with the world. I don't think anybody makes something if they don't have something to say. Now, it might not be your taste, but we can always listen. And that's where that empathy, again, comes from. So, in short, create. Just create. Go live your life. Don't be a passive observer of your life. Because I feel, again, this generation or this number of generations that are alive in the world today as a society, there's this languishing that is happening, right? This apathy. We're not depressed, but we're not extremely happy, and we're just observing them day-to-day life and just moving through our lives, right? I fell victim to that. No, taste the food, breathe the air, kiss your lover, go out and make something and contribute to this world. Leave it a little bit better off than you found it, and the joy that you feel, at least in my experience, is immeasurable.
Yeah. One thing that's going to stay with me from this conversation is taste the food. I'm going to use it in every context, in every way possible.
Yes. As a
Taste
Peruvian, I'm telling you, food is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talked also about love, like kiss your lover. And that reminds me that your book also explores love. And one thing I would just like to know is, like, do you believe in love at first sight? And how's your experience with love as documented in the book? If that's okay.
So yeah, I do. But I've also learned that love is a verb, not a noun, right? So I'm not married. I'm in a happy relationship right now. I'm not married. But I think when you commit to someone, it's a daily thing. You choose, like, you don't choose who you're attracted to, but you choose every day, like, this is my person, right? Like, this is what I'm going to do. And the act of, again, creation, you create love with the actions that you perform, the kindnesses that you have, the person that you open the door for, or the person that you let pass you in traffic. All those little things are acts of kindness and acts of love. So with regards to the book, when I was 33,
Yeah.
and in the book I have poems in Spanish, I have poems in French, I have poems in English, some with words in Portuguese, and just like the different languages that I was, that I've learned and speak and whatever. So when I was 33, I went to Paris for my birthday, right? I called it my Jesus trip. So at 33
Nice. Yeah.
years of age, Jesus lived a full life according to the Bible at 33. I'm like, what did I do? Let me go see Paris, because I've always loved Paris. I read The Count of Monte Cristo very young, and I was obsessed. I became a Francophile with that, right? Like, just the culture and this culture of, like, everything is wonderful, everything passion, right? Like, super passionate. And I met a girl, and I fell in love straight up. Like, the movies, like the books, like the poems, like it was just like that. And we were together for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And that was the relationship that fizzled out when my dad was sick, because of work and where I was able to be in France maybe around 4 to 6 months out of those 2 years, because I was able to work and take vacation and work from there. And one of the things that happened was English is my second language, but I'm fluent, like native fluent. and Spanish is my first. Her first language was French, and her second language was English, and she was great at it. But I wanted to, when I was first there and I started spending time there, I was the dumb boyfriend who was like, oui, ouais, je m'appelle Renzo, right? Like it was, trop
Yeah.
cool, right? Like it was just like these platitudes that I was saying. And after some time, I at least had maybe like an elementary school level ability to speak French, right? But it was very important for me at that time to understand her and speak to her in her native language to truly try to connect and understand. And when my dad was sick, I stopped going there. We just grew apart. I needed my person with me. She needed her person over there. It just didn't work out. But I wrote a poem called To-Do List in French first, and then in English, translated it. And the reason I did that, number one, a to-do list is so easy grammatically to do. So I didn't have to worry about the verb tenses and all that because it's just a to-do list. So it made it easy for me to try to attempt a poem in French.
Yeah.
But it was like a message in a bottle. I don't speak to her. No ill will. We just don't. And, I wanted to keep the promise that I made to her, even though I never told her, right? It's just in my head that I wanted to document our relationship and just thank her for the time, that I hold no ill will, and that all those experiences made me who I am today, which I hope is a better partner to the women that came after and the one who I have now. And hopefully the one I end up with, just a better partner. So love, I've experienced love at first sight. I've experienced love at 17th sight. I've experienced, heartbreak, connection. Long distance can be very difficult. All the respect to people who can do that. It was very difficult for me. But yeah, I think that, again, the way that it's documented in my book, love is essential. It's a part of any relationship that you have with yourself, with others, with a place. There's love to it because there's admiration, there's respect, there's an attraction, So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, love is essential. That's why I asked you actually, because I also believe love is very, very important. I mean, first and foremost, the love that we have towards ourselves. I think every morning when you wake up and you see yourself in the mirror for the first time, you should fall in love with yourself. So, so it's like love at first sight every morning, every day, every.
That's great advice, actually. I mean, it's very hard to truly love other people if you're not kind to yourself.
True.
If you don't love yourself, right? And it's hard to fully love you. We all have trauma. We all have baggage. But it's a great place to start. I do admire you saying that, Toby.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's very difficult, like you said, but I think once we're able to love ourselves fully for who we are, we'll be able to accept love into our life and love other people also. Yeah. So, I mean, there are some listeners out there who would also like to get into the journey or the world of creativity, like writing books or writing poetry or some writing stories also. What would be your advice to them?
Okay. Well, first of all, do it. But my advice is go live, right? Because you need to have something to say. If you feel like you don't, a lot of the people that I've talked to who've come up with this question, I go to a lot of open mics and a lot of performances. I host a lot of book launches here. I'm very privileged to do that. And I get people coming up to me and saying like, oh, I like poetry and I want to write a book, but it's intimidating. It's not for me. I'm like, art is inclusive. I don't know where this rejection of intellectualism or being or learnedness, being learned, being educated has come from. I know don't get me started on the higher education system as a business here in the United States, and some of the issues that it has, but knowledge is something that can't be taken from you, right? That's something that you can acquire, that you can pass on, that cannot be taken from you. Except maybe, I don't know, dementia, Alzheimer's, something like that, right? But it's yours. And if you go out and live and experience and do the things that we talked about, go out, go to different neighborhoods if you don't have the money to travel. Take a train to like if I'm in Miami, go to Jacksonville, go to Tampa, or just go to the next neighborhood. Go play sports, go join local clubs, go clean up a beach, like go do something with others that you're passionate about. You will have something to say. You will be inspired by your experiences to be creative. That's the first step. And the next one would be, don't judge yourself. Enough people are going to judge you. Don't be one of them. Write it out, paint it, film it, create it, sculpt it, do it, and then modify it. And then go talk to, there's writing clubs, there's book clubs, there's painting clubs, there's clubs all over the place. There's people that do the things that you do. Go talk to them. And then there's a lot of local independent publishers that will do it for an affordable price. And just do that. Or you can self-publish. YouTube will tell you how to self-publish. No problem, right?
That's true.
And I believe most people have access to YouTube. If you are listening to this podcast, I believe you have at least access to YouTube. So there's the initial thing is to have the desire to do it, to not judge yourself, and be one of your own supporters. Don't you're going to find 1,000 reasons not to do it. My challenge to somebody who has that question is, can you find a reason to do it? Do you have one? Go do it.
Go do
Just
it.
do it.
Just do it.
Yeah, I mean, we're quoting Nike now, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I'm just in the logo in my head right now. That's what I repeated. Just do it. Renzo, thank you so much. I've learned so much from you from this conversation. I really appreciate the time you took out to explain and to talk and go into depth into your journey and the process of writing your book still. But for people who are out there who still want to maybe ask you more questions, maybe get to know you better, also get the book also, what's the best way to connect and work with you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at Renzo Del Castillo, my name, and I'm sure you'll have it in your show notes, right? But my name is Renzo Del Castillo .author. You can find me on LinkedIn, so you can see what I do at my day job as a healthcare exec on LinkedIn under Renzo Del Castillo. I'm on Renzo Del Castillo on Facebook. Also, www.renzodelcastillo.com is my website. Amazon, we were very lucky. The book is an Amazon bestseller in multiple categories, which is cool, very surprising, right? For a debut poetry collection. You can find it at hardcover. You can find it in paperback. Paperback is great, again, to travel with. So you can find it there. I did the audiobook myself because they told me I had a voice and a face for radio. So I did it myself. And I also have a Kindle. And then this is very important. The Kindle is 99 cents because I couldn't make it free. I think that art should be inclusive. I think art should be accessible. And, I know not a lot of people have all the funds in the world, but if they have 99 cents, they can pick up my book. And that's not a special, that's not radio, that's always
TV. So thank you so much. I'm going to place a link to your website in the show notes of this episode. I encourage everyone out there to click on the link, copy the link, get across to you on the platform that is suitable for each and everyone. But most importantly, also get the book on Amazon. Thank you so much, Renzo. I really appreciate this conversation. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Hey there, podcast enthusiasts. Are you ready to add a little sparkle to your day? If you're loving the insightful conversations and captivating stories on Mirror Talk Podcast, here's a friendly nudge to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the empowering messages and thought-provoking discussions we bring to your ears. But wait, there's more. We're all about spreading positivity and inspiration, and you can be a part of it too. How? By sharing the love with your friends and family. Share this episode with your loved ones, and let's create a ripple effect of empowerment and growth together. And hey, if you've been enjoying what you hear, why not take a moment to leave us a glowing 5-star review? Your feedback fuels our passion to keep delivering content that resonates with you. So hit that subscribe button, share the love, and leave us a review. Let's keep the conversation going and spread the Mirror Talk magic far and wide. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, your support means the world to us.